So imagine you are standing in like a private climate-controlled archive in Genoa, Italy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and the air just smells like old paper and dust and leather. And you open this really brittle leather-bound folder. Inside, there's a manuscript written in faded ink.
Right.
And as you start reading, you realize you might be holding, a document that could completely rewrite the final days of one of history's most infamous, scandalous figures.
Or, I mean, on the flip side, you might be holding the most elaborate, brilliant literary forgery of the entire 19th century.
Exactly. It is sort of the ultimate historical cliffhanger. So welcome to today's deep dive, where we're exploring this newly discovered, highly contested manuscript. It's titled The Embers of Missolonghi.
Yeah, and it's attributed to the legendary romantic poet Lord Byron.
Right. Supposedly written in 1824 during his final days in Greece. And we're talking about a massive 6-canto poem, an unsent letter that was just tucked between its pages, and this huge stack of extensive notes from a modern editor analyzing if it's actually real.
Yeah, and what makes this whole stack of sources so compelling isn't just, the forensic mystery of where it came from.
That's right.
It's the psychological portrait inside it.
Yeah.
Because we're looking at a man who is actively, almost violently, dismantling his own legend.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our mission today isn't just like a dry literary analysis. We're really exploring a man who is stripping away his own carefully constructed public myth to find out what actually matters at the end of a life.
Exactly.
But to understand this manuscript, we kind of first have to understand the literal brick wall of reality that Byron slammed into.
Yeah, so let's look at the historical context the editor provides here. It's early 1824,
Yeah.
and Lord Byron is in Missolonghi, Greece.
Right.
He traveled there to basically fund and physically fight for Greek independence against the Ottoman Empire.
Mm.
And you have to remember, Byron, along with pretty much all of high society Western Europe, carried this highly romanticized classical vision of Greece in his head.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, in his letters, he's expecting Spartan valor under a Dorian moon. He's literally writing about Thermopylae.
Wait, okay, for those of us who, haven't brushed up on ancient Greek history lately, what exactly was he picturing there?
Well, he was picturing these pristine marble ruins, noble philosophers, and like the ultimate underdog story. Thermopylae was that famous ancient battle where 300 Spartans bravely held off this massive Persian army.
Oh, right. Like the movie 300?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Byron was fully expecting this glorious classical war of heroes.
It's like signing up for an epic cinematic war movie, but you get dropped into a miserable, freezing, bureaucratic documentary instead. You think you're getting Gladiator, and you end up in a muddy trench arguing over accounting.
That is precisely the reality of Missolonghi. I mean, it is a mud-soaked swamp. It rains biblically just for days on end.
Yeah, miserable.
And disease is everywhere. Plus, he's surrounded by these mercenary soldiers called Suliotes. And sure, they look magnificent in their traditional skirts, but they absolutely do not care about, quote-unquote, ancient Greek glory.
Right, they're mercenaries.
Exactly. They just constantly mutiny because they haven't been paid. So there's no glory at all. It's just sickness, infighting, and total logistical nightmares.
So I'm trying to imagine how that stark reality actually impacts him. Because Byron's ego was legendary, right? He was basically the rock star of his era.
Oh, completely.
So when the reality just doesn't match the poster, how does he cope with that?
Well, the manuscript shows his ego breaking down almost immediately. And that breakdown is really catalyzed by this massive wave of cognitive dissonance.
Okay.
The editor highlights details from Canto 1, where Byron receives this super cynical letter from his friend, John Cam Hobhouse, back in London. And Hobhouse essentially points out that the English public loves the idea of Greek liberty.
Oh, the idea of it, yeah.
Right. Like they will sit in their comfortable London clubs and toast to the cause with their patriotic port.
Wow, patriotic port. That is such a biting phrase.
Isn't it?
It totally reminds me of modern slacktivism, where people will post a hashtag or change their profile picture for a cause, but they completely refuse to actually donate $1 or volunteer their time.
Yes, that is the exact 19th century equivalent. They'll gladly drink to freedom,
Yeah.
but they absolutely refuse to fund the war or risk their own comfort. And meanwhile, Byron is literally pouring his own personal fortune into this swamp.
Oh, wow.
He's paying mutinous mercenaries out of pocket while London society just applauds his heroism from a very, very safe distance.
So the grand illusion of this heroic cause is just totally shattering for him. The people cheering him on are hypocrites, and the war itself is just a muddy disaster.
Yeah, and that hypocrisy pushes him toward this really incredible turning point in the poem. So Byron is out riding, and he stops at this shabby, smoky taverna in a local village. And he meets an old Greek man there. Byron, who's, still clinging to his persona, starts speaking in these grand, sweeping, poetic terms about the Parthenon and Pericles and this noble, abstract concept of liberty.
Right, because that's all he knows how to do. I mean, he's Lord Byron. He talks in capital letters.
Exactly. But the old man essentially just stops him. He tells Byron that freedom is a much smaller, dirtier thing than what poets imagine.
Interesting.
He says freedom is just bread. It's wood for the fire. It's simply the absence of the Turk. It's the right to your own miseries. As the old man puts it, freedom includes the freedom to grow weeds.
The freedom to grow weeds. I really love that. It completely punctures Byron's high-minded rhetoric and just brings the entire concept of liberty right down to the dirt.
Yeah. And what's fascinating here is that this old man introduces the central philosophical anchor of the entire manuscript. As Byron and his companion Pietro are leaving the taverna, the old man smiles and says this untranslatable Greek word to them.
Right, and the editor notes that Pietro writes it down phonetically. It sounds something like kaiamino, but it's this rare, highly specific dialectal word.
Yes, and Byron becomes completely obsessed with this word over the next few cantos. He eventually realizes it isn't a word for fire itself. It's a word for the mark that warmth leaves on the person who was warmed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's the lingering residue of shared heat after the fire's actually gone.
Which is such a profound concept, especially if we connect it to you, the listener. Like, think about it. We all spend so much time and energy trying to build a blazing legacy. We build a career, a reputation, a personal brand online.
Right, exactly.
We want to be the fire. But what if the fire doesn't actually matter? What if the only thing of actual lasting value is that quiet afterglow we leave in the people around us?
And that is the exact realization Byron is struggling toward. The editor's notes provide this brilliant linguistic analysis of the moment. The editor categorizes this untranslatable word as an apophatic symbol.
Okay, epiphatic. Let's break that down, because that is a heavy theological term.
It is. In theology and philosophy, apophatic refers to understanding something by describing what it is not.
Ah, okay.
It communicates by pointing to the empty space, to the limits of language, to what simply cannot be said directly.
So it's like describing the shadow to explain the object.
Exactly. And this is a brutal realization for Byron because he is, historically, the ultimate cataphatic poet.
Meaning he is excessively verbal. He uses thousands of words, endless stanzas, these massive epic poems to describe everything in granular detail.
Yes, he has built his entire fame, his entire identity on his absolute mastery of the English language. But this one word defeats him. It forces him to confront the boundaries of his own genius.
Right.
He realizes that the truest, most visceral human experiences just can't be wrangled into a clever rhyme scheme.
So if his words are failing him and his grand public persona is utterly useless in a Greek swamp, what is left for him to do? I mean, he can't look outward anymore, so he has to look backward.
Exactly. He starts reviewing the geography of his own life.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because we see this shift happen in Canto 4, right?
Yes, the poem essentially becomes an internal map. He reflects on Harrow, his prestigious boarding school, but he doesn't write about the glory of it. He writes about the fact that he was born with an inward-turned foot.
Which was a physical disability that caused him immense pain and embarrassment.
Right. And he realizes that his entire adult life was just a massive overcompensation for that childhood shame. He became the boxer, the swimmer, the ruthless seducer, entirely to mask the fact that he felt broken.
He also looks at Newstead Abbey, his ruined ancestral estate, and Venice, the city of beautiful decay.
And the manuscript uses this specific word to describe human beings. It calls us palimpsests.
Yeah, a palimpsest being an old manuscript page where the original writing has been scraped off so new text can be written over it.
Because parchment was expensive, so they reused it.
Exactly. But the scraping was never perfect. The old text always left a faint, ghostly trace underneath the new ink. It's like recording over an old VHS tape. You know, you're watching the new movie you recorded, but every so often the tracking slips, and you get these fuzzy, ghostly glimpses of the old footage playing underneath.
That's a great way to put it.
You see the ghosts of who you used to be. We are walking ruins, built on the rubble of our past selves. But I'm stuck on why that's a good thing. I mean, most people would panic if they realized their whole identity was just a crumbling facade of overwritten tapes. How does this realization actually help him face death?
Well, it helps him by entirely destroying his need to be perfect. It makes him desperate for authenticity over legacy. And the editor points out that we see the proof of this in the physical artifact of the manuscript itself.
Right, the letter.
Yes, tucked right between the pages of Canto 5 and 6 is this unsent letter to his half-sister, Augusta Lee.
And there is a deep tragedy in that letter, knowing you have to literally beg your own family to keep the ugly, honest parts of you alive.
He clearly sees the writing on the wall. In the letter, Byron predicts that his friends, specifically Hobhouse and his publisher John Murray, will burn his personal memoirs after he dies to protect his reputation.
And historically, we know this actually happened. A month after his death, they gathered in a London office and burned his memoirs in a fireplace to protect the brand.
Yeah, they did. But in this unsent letter, Byron begs Augusta to ensure that this poem, The Embers of Missolonghi, survives intact. He explicitly tells her to leave in the self-pitying parts, the ugly parts, the failures.
Because he understands now that the curated, acceptable version of Lord Byron is a total fiction. He wants to be known as he is, a ruin and a palimpsest, rather than this polished, unfeeling marble statue.
Exactly.
Which brings us to Canto 5 and 6, where that physical ruin becomes incredibly literal. I mean, Byron is physically collapsing.
He's actively dying. A severe fever is ravaging his body. And we really have to look at the medical context of 1824 here.
Oh boy, yeah.
His doctor, Dr. Bruno, is relying on humorism, the belief that illness is caused by an imbalance of fluids. So to cure the fever, Dr. Bruno is repeatedly bleeding Byron with leeches.
Which is just horrific to imagine. The man is already weakened by fever, and his doctor is literally draining his lifeblood away. It's kind of the perfect grim metaphor for his situation, though.
How so?
Well, the Greek swamp drained his wealth and his ego, and now the leeches are draining his physical life.
Yeah, that's very true. The manuscript describes him feeling entirely hollowed out, like a tree struck by lightning. But right here, in this incredibly weakened, dying state, he makes this massive confession.
Right.
He dedicates a huge portion of the text to his unrequited love for his page, a 15-year-old Greek boy named Lucas Chalandritsanos.
And I really have to push back on this because it feels completely out of character. I mean, wait, Byron is known for his massive ego and countless conquests. Lady Caroline Lamb, Lady Oxford, the hundreds of women in Venice. Why focus on an unrequited love at the very end?
It does seem contradictory on the surface, yes. But the editor argues it makes perfect psychological sense within the framework of the poem. Byron realizes that unrequited love is love completely stripped of the illusion of reciprocity.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of that. Like, what does that actually mean?
Well, when love is returned, when it's mutual, we often trick ourselves into thinking two people have merged into one single entity. We lose our edges. But unrequited love highlights the irreducible, painful distance between two human beings. You are you, and they are they, and the gap just cannot be closed. By focusing on Lucas, whose youth and total indifference make him completely unreachable, Byron is forcing himself to feel that specific ache.
Oh, wow. So the ache is the point. He isn't trying to win the boy over. He's trying to feel the pain of the gap.
Precisely. Lucas's indifference is the tether that keeps Byron anchored to feeling something. Byron actually writes in Canto 6 that his greatest fear isn't death itself. His greatest fear is apathy.
Slipping into that existential emptiness where he just goes numb.
Exactly. Stopping caring before his heart actually stops. Wanting Lucas, even hopelessly, keeps his heart beating. It keeps him alive and tethered to the world until the very last moment.
So it's not about seduction at all. It's about survival. It's a refusal to go quietly. And that refusal sets up the final sequence of the poem, which takes place in this intense fever dream.
Yeah, the dream sequence is the culmination of the entire manuscript. Byron dreams he is sitting in a waiting room, like a sort of purgatorial space between life and death. And sitting across from him is the old man from the taverna.
The man who talked about the freedom to grow weeds.
Yes, and the old man reveals the final truth to Byron. He tells him that his true legacy is not the grand Greek cause. It won't be found in history books, and it won't be carved into marble monuments.
Right.
His true legacy is the small, entirely unrecorded kindnesses he performed when no one was looking.
And the manuscript actually lists them out, right? Giving a handful of gold to a local widow, and a glass of water to his valet, Fletcher, when Fletcher himself was sick with a fever.
Yeah, the quiet warmth, the ember, not the blaze. The old man tells him that this is the untranslatable word realized, kaiomino. It's the warmth left in the hand of a stranger.
So we have this incredibly moving, philosophically dense, emotionally raw text. So what does this all mean? We have to address the elephant in the archive here. Is it real? Because the editor spends a massive amount of time on this. Is this genuinely Lord Byron's final masterpiece?
Well, the editor lays out a very compelling forensic case for its authenticity, and the physical evidence is remarkably strong.
Okay.
They tested the paper stock, and the watermarks perfectly match paper produced and sold in the Ionian Islands in the early 1820s. The ink is an iron gall composition that shows the exact type of chemical fading and degradation you would expect from a 200-year-old document.
And what about the handwriting? Because, forgery is an art form.
Well, the handwriting analysis is absolutely fascinating. It matches Byron's verified holographs, his known letters and manuscripts. It has the specific rightward slope he used when writing rapidly in a manic state. But more importantly, the forger would have had to perfectly replicate unconscious habits, like the very specific idiosyncratic lute Byron used when forming the lowercase d.
Man, that level of microscopic detail is so hard to fake for hundreds of pages. And there's the poetry itself, too. The editor notes it's written in ottava rima.
Yes, that's an 8-line stanza with a strict ABABCC rhyme scheme.
That sounds complicated.
It is incredibly difficult to sustain in English because English is rhyme poor compared to Italian.
Yeah.
You need a massive, agile vocabulary to find 3 rhyming words over and over without sounding forced.
Wow.
It's the exact same complex form Byron used for his famous epic Don Juan, and the author of this manuscript wields it with that signature Byronic mix of comedy, tragedy, and brilliant digression.
It sounds like a forensic slam dunk. I mean, the paper, the ink, the handwriting, the poetic mechanics all line up. But there's a catch, isn't there?
Yeah, and this raises an important question. The editor is very transparent about the reasons for doubt. First, the provenance. The documented chain of ownership has massive gaps.
Right. It kind of just popped up out of nowhere.
Exactly. The manuscript supposedly passed through multiple undocumented private hands before suddenly turning up in an estate sale in 1927. But the biggest red flag isn't physical. It's philosophical.
You're talking about the focus on bare, stripped-down awareness, the existential presence he writes about in that final dream sequence.
Yes, the intense focus on living purely in the present moment, on a kind of non-theistic mindfulness.
Yeah.
It feels completely out of place for the 1820s. The editor notes that it reads much more like 20th century phenomenology or existentialism than 19th century romanticism.
Okay, hold on. Phenomenology. For those of us who didn't major in 20th century philosophy, what does that actually mean in the context of this poem?
Sure. Phenomenology is a philosophical movement that didn't really take off until the 1900s. It focuses on the direct, first-person experience of consciousness, stripping away theories and historical context to just look at how we experience the world moment by moment. That kind of hyper-focused, stripped-down psychological analysis is almost entirely absent from the Romantic era, which was all about grand emotion and historical sweep.
It's like finding a beautifully painted, historically accurate Renaissance portrait, but when you look closely, the subject is wearing an Apple Watch.
Exactly.
The technique is flawless, the materials are right, but the timing is incredibly suspicious. It's almost too modern. A skeptic could easily argue it's the work of a brilliant 20th century forger projecting modern post-World War I philosophy backward onto a 19th century icon.
And if it is a forgery, it is a work of absolute staggering genius.
But the editor makes a really interesting pivot at the end of their notes regarding this exact debate, don't they?
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the editor argues that ultimately the question of authorship is secondary to the achievement of the text itself. Yeah, because whether this is Lord Byron's final, shocking evolution as a thinker facing his own brutal death, or it's a masterful deception by an unknown 20th century writer, it succeeds as a profound piece of art.
Because it does what Byron's famous epic Don Juan couldn't do. Don Juan was brilliant, but it hid behind irony. It laughed so it didn't have to cry.
Yes.
It kept the reader at arm's length. But the Embers of Missolonghi drops the armor entirely. It faces mortality honestly with no aesthetic distance to protect the author's ego.
And strips away the myth to find the fragile human underneath.
And what a journey it takes us on to find him. The Embers of Missolonghi pulls us from a muddy, miserable swamp in Greece right through the ruined architecture of a poet's overblown ego, all the way down to the absolute core of human existence.
Yeah.
It destroys the legend of the untouchable genius, only to reveal a dying man clinging to the simple truth of shared warmth.
The untranslatable word. The mark the fire leaves behind.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to carry with you. We've spent this entire time debating the authenticity of this document, right? We want to know if it's real because we crave a good story. We want the tragic figure of Lord Byron to have this neat, profound realization at the end of his life.
Naturally, yeah.
But think about this. Byron's actual memoirs were famously burned in a London fireplace by his friends to protect his brand.
Right.
If your own metaphorical memoirs, your social media, your resume, your carefully curated public face, if all of that were burned today, what untranslatable warmth would you leave behind in the hands of the people who actually know you?
That's a powerful question.
Think about that the next time you accept a narrative just because it feels emotionally satisfying. Or the next time you picture that dusty manuscript sitting in a quiet, dark archive in Genoa.